what have you. First thing I need to do is find my remote here. Oh, there it is, hiding way in underneath here. There we go. So we are in the general topic of current culture, issues in our current culture, and we're in the second lesson of this study, which most of these lessons you can't do up in 1 week, and at least not do them justice. And when Pastor and I talk about some of these things, why we sort of agree that let's cover the topic as opposed to just get a lesson in. So we are in the second session of biblical economics. Now, what is economics? Somebody tell me what economics is. You know, if it's biblical economics, what is economics? Somebody says, I'm studying economics. What are they studying? You got some wise people, young people down here. You guys know everything, don't you? What's economics? What does it mean when somebody says economics? What do you think of? Huh? Finances, okay. Yeah, it has to do with finances, right. Not just finances, though. It has to do, really, economics has to do with all of our goods, services, and abilities that God has given to us, and we're supposed to look after them. And we're going to look at some verses today where God tells us that. But there's a basis for evaluating economics. Oops. We'll get things going here eventually. There's positive economics, and I'm not going to repeat all these slides. There's positive economics and normative economics. There's positive economics is what economics actually is, and then there's what they call normative economics is what really is. We would say that we live, what kind of a society do we live in? Primarily, what would you say Canada is? What kind of a society, economically speaking, at least theoretically? Okay. Josiah says it's capitalist. Are we completely capitalist? What's some other flavors that we have? We have some socialism. Is socialism, if we had a perfect heart, would socialism necessarily be wrong? If we had a perfect heart? No. What's the big problem with socialism? We have sinful people, right? And when we have sinful people, and we're going to talk a little bit about that. So, if you've ever heard argument, if you ever watched a debate on TV or somewhere, or even a live debate, and people, have capitalistic people and communistic people and socialistic people and so on, and they get arguing, everybody thinks everybody else is ignorant. Right? You're just ignorant. You wouldn't say that if you weren't ignorant. Well, that's not really the proper way to discuss anything, is it? Those of us who would adhere to a more or less capitalistic philosophy, we're called cold and heartless because we don't really care about people. Well, is that necessarily true? Can we be a capitalist and care about people? And can we be a socialist and not care about people? Yeah, we're going to look at some examples of that. As believers, we shouldn't be socialists, and we shouldn't be communists, and we shouldn't be capitalists, pure and simple. We should be biblicists, as God gives us some principles of economics, and we'll talk about that. There's no human economic system that can be perfect. So there's free market economy, and we talked about that. Like if you have something to sell, how much can you sell it for? Whatever you can get out of it, or put it another way, whatever somebody's willing to pay for it. If you put something on the market and you say, I want $20 for it, and nobody was willing to pay $20 for it, are you going to sell it? No. On the other hand, we've had situations, even like with houses, where people put their house on the market for $300,000 and they end up getting $350,000. Why? Because somebody really wanted it, and they're going to compete again for it and so on. So the value of something is determined by what somebody's willing to pay for it, right? Not necessarily what you think it's worth. And then we have communism, where the state owns the property and controls the economic system. And we have socialism, where individuals own the property and operate the retail markets, but the state owns the tools to produce the goods. In other words, you will only make what we say you can make, and you will only make as much as we say you can make, and so on, but you still own it. There's still individual ownership. And then in socialism, profit and capital accumulation are discouraged. We'll talk a little bit. Now, I have some quotes for you. I just got these. Somebody sent me these overnight, actually. And if you ever get an opportunity to go on YouTube and look up a guy by the name of Thomas Sowell, S-O-W-E-L-L, you will be well rewarded by listening to him. I don't know if he's a Christian. He may be, but I'm not sure about that. But he is he's very refreshing in these days. He's a man, he's older than I am, so he's been around for a while. And he's very refreshing. He says, one of the sad signs of our times is that we have demonized those who produce, subsidized those who refuse to produce, and canonized those who complain. Think about that. Do we ever have that happening in the province of New Brunswick? Do we have anybody who complains about, well, we take the two big corporations in the province, McCain's and Irving's, that they make too much money? Have you ever heard anybody say that? What would happen if they made less money? We'd have fewer people working, wouldn't we? And I'm not supporting necessarily, I'm not evangelizing for them, I'm just being factual. If McCain's and Irving's pulled out of New Brunswick, we wouldn't have much left, would we? I mean, there's some other big corporations, but they're the two biggest. But do we have people complain that some people make too much money? I worked with a guy one time, nice guy, but he said nobody should be able to make over $2 million a year. Anything you make over $2 million a year should be taken. And I said, well, Mr. Irving, and I mean there's a whole bunch of Mr. Irvings, but if we sort of put it in one lump, I said, let's suppose that was Mr. Irving, and the government says you can't make more than $2 million a year. What would happen to the oil refinery? What would happen to the pulp mill? What would happen to the sawmills? Do they make money because they need more money? No, it's like them playing, like you playing Monopoly. It's a game. It's what they do. They don't need more money, but if they're going to be successful in business, they're going to make more money, aren't they? And it's about being successful in business. It's not necessarily about getting more money. And we have people that complain. Do we subsidize those who refuse to produce or just aren't very good at producing? Do we ever subsidize those? Have we ever hear on the news about the government gave such and such a company $50 million and now we can't get it back because they went under? I mean, we've had several cases that have gone to court and so on here, and it happens all the time. Subsidize who refuse to produce, and then we canonize or make saints of those who complain. Interesting, isn't it? That's a true statement, isn't it? I like this one. He says, what exactly is your fair share of what someone else has worked for? Do you ever hear say we should all share? Well, if you don't want to work, why should I give you some of my money? Because I've worked hard, right? And even if that were true, what would be a fair share? 2% of what I make? 5% of what I make? 50% of what I make? I don't know. What would be a fair share? I like that one. And then we have a couple of more quotes here. He says, we seem to be getting closer and closer to a situation where nobody is responsible for what they did, but we are all responsible for what somebody else did. Do you ever listen to the news? Do you ever listen about something happened to somebody 100 years ago or 200 years ago, and we're all responsible for it? It's all our fault. Now, have some people through history done some really nasty things? Yeah, they have. And are there some bad things in our history that we'd probably just as soon forget about? Yes, there are. Did you do it? Did I do it? So why should I have to pay for what my great-great-great-grandfather did? I don't know. And then he says, this is a good one. Some of the biggest cases of mistaken identity are among intellectuals who have trouble remembering that they are not God. Do we have some politicians that sort of think that way? They think they're God. They may not say that, but that's how they act. And that's an interesting way of putting it. Mistaken identity, they forget to remember that they're not God. Okay, I just saw, I got those quotes from a friend this morning, and I thought they fit into our lesson so well, I thought I'd put them in there. So, biblical economics. Let's find out what the Bible says. We are responsible as a private steward, and I'm not going to go over these verses again. Which of these economic systems is biblical? We talked about communism, socialism, and capitalism. Which one is a biblical system? Which one is said that thou shalt be Is there any of those in the Bible? No. There's none of these systems that are totally biblical, because they're man-made. Is there anything that's man-made that's 100% biblical? That's 100% right? No. Stewardship is part of God's plan. Work is for mankind. We looked at some of these verses. What did God, let's go back here. This is very important. Sometimes, anybody here ever complained about having to work? Now, come on, be honest. Anybody here ever complained about having to work, or that you had to work too hard? I see a lot of smiles. We've probably all complained about it at least once in our life. Genesis 2:15, what did God tell Adam? He says, and the Lord took the man and put him in the Garden of Eden to do what? To dress it and keep it. In other words, he was supposed to be a farmer. So the first business was farming. Interesting. And God told him, do you have to, if you're going to dress the garden and keep it, what's a four-letter word that covers that? Work. Adam was expected to work. Had he sinned yet? Was work caused by sin? No, work was not caused by sin. Work was what God expected man to do. But what happened in Genesis chapter 3, 17 and 18? Unto Adam he said, because thou hast hearkened unto the voice of thy wife, and hast eaten of the tree of which I commanded thee, saying, thou shalt not eat of it. Cursed is the ground for thy sake, and sorrow shalt thou eat of it all the days of thy life. Thorns also and thistles shall it bring forth to thee, and thou shalt eat the herb of the field. In the sweat of thy face shalt thou eat bread. And so on. So things got harder after the fall. But they didn't get any different in terms of what was required. They're still required to work. We just had to work harder. Okay. We're responsible to be a private steward. Let's go to Exodus chapter 20. What's in Exodus chapter 20, by the way? Yeah, these young people should know. They've been studying them. They were. Exodus chapter 20 contains the 10 Commandments. Exodus 20:15 says, thou shalt not steal. Okay, thou shalt not steal. Okay, if thou shalt not steal, what does that say about what the other person has? It's theirs, okay? What's a bigger word for it's theirs? They have, what do they do to it? What? They have ownership of it. Oh, very good, Louise. They have ownership of it. What is God saying about ownership in this verse? Is it bad or good? Well, if God says thou shalt not take something from somebody that has ownership of it, he says it's wrong to do that, what does he say about ownership? There's no verse that says ownership is bad or ownership is good, but what does this verse say? If it's wrong to steal something that somebody has ownership of, what can we say about ownership? It's good, right? Come on, guys, talk to me. I didn't say hi to all the people that are online here, all the hundreds and hundreds of people that are watching us online. Hundreds from I heard a pastor say one time he was visiting somewhere in the States, and somebody said to him, "Oh, hi, brother so-and-so, how are you doing?" He said, "What are you running in your church?" I mean, this is a saying that you hear from preachers. "What are you running in your church?" He said, he says, "We run between about 2,000 and 5,000. And the guy said, I didn't think, this is a preacher from this area. And he said, "I didn't think there was any churches that big anywhere where you are." He says, we're closer to 2 than we are to 5,000, but we are between 2 and 5,000. Anyway, I'm not sure why I said that. Ownership is good. God says ownership is good. And we have people today that say, no, nobody should own anything. Have you heard the saying that some people at, great events in Europe and so on say, by such and such a date, you're not going to own anything, but you're going to be happy about it. Does that make you sound happy? Does that sound like happiness to you? We're not going to own anything. We're not going to own our house. We're not going to own our car. In fact, we're not even going to be allowed to have a car because we're going to have to take public transit, or we're going to have to walk. We're going to go into have you heard of the 15-minute community? Everybody's going to live in an area where they can walk to everything that they need within 15 minutes. Your grocery store, your drugstore, your doctor, everything's within 15 minutes. You won't need a car and so on. But what does that allow them? I don't mean God. What does it allow those people that are saying this to do to us? Control us. All they have to do is put some roadblocks at the entrance to this 15-minute community, and we're stuck there. Well, ownership is good. God says ownership is good. And then Exodus 20:17, what does it say? Come on, you young people. 15 says, "Thou shalt not steal." What's 2 verses after that say? Thou shalt not covet. What does it mean to covet? These young people have just had a class on this, so they should be experts. They can educate all us older people. What does it mean to covet? Okay, to desire something that belongs to somebody else, something that you don't really have any right to have as such. And what does Hebrews 13:15 say? It's another important verse. And we as Christians get taught. Do Christians ever covet anything? Hebrews 13:15. What are we supposed to do? What kind of an attitude are we supposed to have for where we are in life? By him, therefore, let us offer the sacrifice of praise to God continually. That is the fruit of our lips, giving thanks. What are we supposed to do with where we are? Give thanks to God for what we have. Does that mean that we shouldn't try to do better? Does that mean that we shouldn't try to have something or other that's a little better than what we have? If we're way down in the economic scale, should we work a little harder to maybe just move up a little bit? Is there anything wrong? No, the Bible never says anything about that. But we're not supposed to covet it. We're not supposed to say, well, I'm poor and I'm down in the dumps, and this guy across the street, he's got a nice car and a nice house, and he should share it with me. No. That's not what the Bible says. Why is it offensive to God to covet what somebody else owns? Why does God not like that? Pardon me? Okay. What you have, where did you get it? God gave it to you. Do you have anything that didn't come from God? No. Even some things that we have that maybe we shouldn't have. How do we get them? God allowed us to have them, didn't he? Do you know that if God didn't allow you to have whatever, X, Y, or Z, you wouldn't have it? Because you can't get something God doesn't allow you to have. He may not want you to have it, but he does allow you to have it. And we probably all have had things in our lives that he didn't necessarily want us to have, but he's allowed us to have. Anything that we have. What Proverbs 14:4, what does that say? You know, we can get up, I can get up here and talk about all kinds of things and quote other people and so on, but what's our authority? What as Baptists do we say our ultimate authority is? The Bible is, or what? For our authority for everything in faith and practice. Would that cover our economics? I think so. Proverbs 14:4. I'm looking at 4:4 and wondering why it's the wrong verse. 14:4. It says, where no oxen are, the crib is clean, but much increase is by the strength of the ox. Let's analyze that verse. What is Solomon saying in this verse under inspiration from God? What's he saying? There's a principle here. So everybody should own an ox? Is that what he's saying? Nope. That if you do have an ox, it should keep it in the crib? No, I don't think that's what he's saying. You know what the ox crib is? It's actually the manger or whatever. It's not a bed. What's this verse saying? Let's analyze it. Pardon me?
Life is easier without the oxen or work or profit, but much increase in profit. Meaning if you have profit, it's going to be work and a mess, but you're going to have more than if you didn't have it.
Okay, yeah. If you have an ox, you're probably going to have more stuff. If you were a farmer and had to farm without an ox or farm with an ox, which would you sooner do? Jillian's here, and we've been down there, and we've seen out on the side of the hill, and where they are, the soil is rocky and gravelly and not very productive. And you see this lady out there, and she looks like she's about 90 years old. She's probably 30. But, I mean, they work hard. She's out there, she's got a mattock. You know what a mattock is? Some of you do. It's like a hoe, but it's more like a pickaxe, but it's wide. And she's out there, and guess what she's doing? She's plowing her field so she can put some potatoes in, because the men don't want to be bothered. They're too lazy in most of the cases. They're probably home sleeping off the drunk from the night before. I'm not joking. She's out there working. Would she be helped if she had an ox? Yeah, or a donkey. They have lots of donkeys down there, but a lot of these people are too poor to even have a donkey. She's out there working. So what's this verse saying to that lady? If you had an ox, you could get your field dug up quicker, and you could have more field, and you could have more potatoes, right? And if you had more potatoes, you could sell more potatoes, and you'd be able to live a little bit better. That's what it's saying. So what's God trying to tell us here in this? Is he saying this is a bad thing? No, he's saying that we should work. We should try to get ahead. If we don't have an ox, maybe we should try to get one. Right. If you work, you're going to increase it. And it also says we should work smart too, right? But there's another principle here too that we're going to get to a little later, but maybe we'll just talk about it right now. What if you don't have money to buy an ox? Pardon me?
Your crib is clean. Your crib will be clean.
Your crib will be clean, right? Your crib will be clean. But what if you want an ox and you think it would be a real good thing to have an ox? What should you do? Pardon me? Be thankful, okay. But, okay, let's take this a little farther. There's a principle here. Okay, work and save some money till you can get an ox. Don't go put it on your credit card, right? Because that'll cost you twice as much as what the ox cost in the first place, or maybe more than that. Work hard and save up some money and get the ox. Okay, a steward. Let's go to Matthew 25. And we're going to look at this from the point of economics. We're not going to look at it from the sort of spiritual point of view. There's a spiritual story here. Everything that Jesus told had a spiritual implication to it. But you know, Jesus was a very practical guy. Did you know that? Jesus was very practical. In many of the stories that he told, he was telling a spiritual lesson, but there was also a life lesson in it too, not just a spiritual lesson. They go together. And there's some life lessons in this, in Matthew 25. Where are we going here? 14 to 20. This is the parable of the talents. And I'm not going to read all this. You know the parable of the talents. Remember, the man was going away. He went to a far country, and he called his servants, and he gave them some of his goods. And he gave one guy 5 talents, and one guy 2 talents, and one guy 1 talent. What's the economic in all this, and what happened? One guy went out and he took his 5 talents, and he made another 5 talents. Another guy made 2 talents with the 2 talents that he had, and the guy that had 1, he went and hid it in the ground and didn't make anything. What's the economic principle here that Jesus is saying? There's spiritual principles here too, but we're talking economics right now, so I'm not going to do a sermon on the spiritual part of it, although it's related. What's he saying here economically? There's several things that are happening here. What principle was Jesus saying about this rich man? He had some things and he gave them to his servants. Did he condemn the rich man for being rich? No. Did he condemn the servants for taking the money? And what happened with the 2 servants that did the bidding of their master? What did he commend them for? Well done. And what did they do? They invested their money. They looked after their money. They put it to work, right? So there's a whole lot of principles here. Is investing a bad thing? No, investing's not a bad thing. Is gambling a bad thing? Now, sometimes investing can be gambling, so we need to be careful when we invest. But Jesus is saying investing is a good thing. Looking after what you have is a good thing. Being lazy is a bad thing, right? Or being careless. We could say that the guy that had 1 talent, he was either lazy, or he was careless, or he was not very smart, or I don't know, there's a whole bunch of things we could say. But he didn't get commended, did he? So Jesus' economic principle here is it's not wrong to have wealth, and it's not wrong to use wealth, and it's not wrong to have resources, and it's not wrong to increase your resources. So if you listen to socialists and you listen to communists, they'll tell you all those things are wrong. Well, Jesus never taught that. If you listen to some of these people, they say Jesus was the greatest communist there ever was. Jesus was the greatest socialist there ever was. You ever heard that story, that line? Well, I have. No, he wasn't. Okay, 2 Corinthians 5. We could go a lot faster if we didn't look at these verses, but we need to look at these verses because they're what's important. 2 Corinthians 5, 9 and 10. For therefore we, what's the next word? Labor. Now, he's talking here specifically about spiritual things, but by implication, what does labor involve? Is every labor that we do a spiritual activity as such? Is weeding the flower bed out here a spiritual activity as such? It can be a spiritual activity as we offer it to the Lord, but the weeding of the flower bed is just work, right? That's all it is. When Walter comes up here and mows the lawn, that's work. Now, maybe a spiritual activity too, and he's doing it as unto the Lord, but it's still work, right? He's going to get just as hot. Pardon me? Right, and when we drive in, and when my wife and I say oftentimes we drive in here, and we just sort of say, isn't this wonderful what the Lord's given us? It's beautiful when you drive in here. And what would it look like if we didn't mow this place? It would look horrible, wouldn't it? So that's called, what's the word of looking after what God's given us? What's that called? Stewardship, right. We're supposed to be stewards. Okay, what should be our aim? He says, we labor, whether present or absent, we may be accepted of him. What should be our aim when we decide how to use the money and goods God has entrusted to us? What's our goal? Has God given everybody here something? Well, you wouldn't be here this morning if he hadn't given you something. You've got clothes, and you probably all had something to eat this morning, and there was some kind of transportation to get you here, and so and so. So what are we supposed to do with all that stuff? Use it for me? No, we're supposed to use it for him. Now, we have to use some of it for me. I mean, God doesn't need clothes. So when we buy clothes, we don't buy them specifically. I'm not trying to be smart here, but we don't buy clothes for God. But he would expect us to have some for ourselves, wouldn't he? I mean, it's just a good idea, especially in the wintertime. But in the summertime, we should wear clothes too. Okay? Okay, let's suppose we lived in a socialist, an extremely socialist country or a communist country. How could you be a good steward there? Think about this. How could you be a good steward? Let's suppose this was Soviet Russia. Or let's suppose this was North Vietnam or North Korea. Let's suppose you were a Christian in North Korea right now. Now, you probably wouldn't have very much. You'd probably be eating bark off the trees and stuff. There's only about 1 million people in North Korea that live well. They live in the capital city, and they live very, very, very well. The rest of the people basically are starving to death. That's a fact. That's not propaganda. That's a fact. So you're one of these peasants out there in the country, and you've come to know the Lord, and what should you do with the little bit that you have? Hard question, isn't it? You might not have enough to feed your family today. Let's suppose somebody came that had even less, came to your door, what should you do? Well, maybe you should feed your kids and go hungry yourself, right? It's a hard question, isn't it? How can we be good stewards here? I need 5 answers. There's 5 ways of being a good steward here in Canada, 2023, August the 6th or something like that, I don't know, yeah. How can we be a good steward here? What's God given us? He's given us money, He's given us stuff, He's given us bodies, He's given us minds, He's given us a beautiful building to come worship. How can we be good stewards of all that? Be concerned about others, okay? Less wasting. Oh, you mean we waste stuff in our society? Did you ever see the garbage truck go by? How much of the stuff that's in the garbage truck is really garbage? Now, some of it was garbage when people bought it because they didn't buy very good quality stuff. It broke in about 2 days because they just bought a piece of junk to start with. But we waste a lot of stuff, don't we? How can we be good stewards? Okay. Consider others. Be less wasteful. I need 3 more. Work hard with what you have. Okay, I need 2 more. Take care of it. Oh, now there's a very good one. Why are a lot of things put in the garbage? Because somebody didn't take care of it. It might be a very expensive piece of whatever, and somebody left it sitting outside in the rain for 6 months. And what happened to it? It became junk. It's no good for anything. Have all of us maybe at some point in our life been careless with something that costs some money? And probably. Some are better at looking after things than others. Well, that's a very good one. Take care of it. God gives you something, we should take care of it. If you don't need it, give it to somebody else or sell it, but don't just let it go to waste. Okay, 1 more. I don't want to do all the work in this lesson, you know. What's another one? Nobody can think of any more?
He said give it to somebody who needs it or use it, make use of what we do have.
Okay, there's a good one right there. If you don't need it, give it to somebody or sell it or do something with it. Make sure it goes somewhere where it can be used. We probably all have something sitting around in our house that we never ever use and never ever will use, but somebody would love to have it, right? Anybody have anything like that in their house? And it was probably something you absolutely had to have 10 years ago, and used it 3 times and said, "That I don't want that. That's no good to me." Pardon me? Lucky to find it, yeah. But don't we do those things? Yeah, we do. And then we have a hard time letting go, so it sits in the cupboard down in the corner, and 10 years from now we clean out the cupboard, and guess what? Oh, I didn't even remember I had that. Janet, are you pleading guilty? Yeah. We've all done that, haven't we? So we're supposed to look after things. Okay, responsibilities as a private steward. And then we have this thing called freedom and restraint. Under communist system, you don't have much freedom, and you have a lot of restraint that's applied to you. Under a socialist system, somebody's telling you everything you can do and so on, and we'll talk a little more about that. But under a capitalist system, we have the freedom more or less to do what we want, and more or less to be restrained, right? Are we supposed to just go do whatever? Do we have total freedom in our country? What would happen if we had total freedom in our country? What would we not have? We wouldn't have any freedom, right? If you could just, there was no stop signs, there were no speed limits, there were no traffic lights, there were no safety inspections, there was no anything like that, what would happen? Why, it'd just be anarchy, wouldn't it? It'd be chaos. So we have freedom and restraint. How were we made? We were made in God's image. And what do we know about God? Well, we've had a bunch of studies here, so we should know a lot of things about God. But basically, God is perfect. As for God, his ways are perfect. Psalm 18, 15 maybe. I know it's in Psalm 18 because I've just been reading that. I just can't remember which verse it is. As for God, his ways are perfect. That was one of the first verses that Jillian's kids memorized, and they used to call up and tell us their first memory verse. As for God, his way are perfect. It was so cute. Okay, we were created in God's image. God is good, right? What are we supposed to be? What does it tell us several places in the Bible? Be ye holy. Why? Because I'm holy. Are we ever going to get there? No, but that's what he expects, isn't it? Are we holy in his sight? There's the theological question for you. If you're saved, are you holy in God's sight? Yes, you are. What does Ephesians tell us? Where are we right now as far as God is concerned? This is hard to get our mind around, but where does God say he sees us right now in the book of Ephesians? We're already seated in the heavenlies. He sees us already there. God doesn't have time. There's no time with God. He's a timeless being. He's the only timeless being. He sees us already seated in the heavenlies, and he sees us as perfect through what? The imputed righteousness of his Son. But then there's the reality of living here in the nasty now, and sometimes we're not very perfect, right? Well, I know some of you are. Some of our wives are, but us guys, we're not very perfect, are we? Some of us have perfect wives. Well, they can't be perfect because they married us, right, Walter? He's not going to comment. Okay, we're created in God's image. And what are some things that God was? God was creative, right? As far as the Bible is concerned, what's the first thing we know about God? The very first verse, what's it say? In the beginning, God did what? Created. So the first thing we know about God is that he's creative. That's not necessarily his most important attribute, but it's the first one we know about. Can God solve problems? Yeah, he solves a lot of problems. And we're created in his image, so we must be creative, right? And that goes in various degrees. Some people are extremely creative, and other people have a hard time, figuring out how to tie their own shoes. But anyway, solve problems. Does he make us so we can solve problems? Yeah, some are really good at solving problems. Some are just good at making problems. But we're all good at problems. We make moral assessments every day. Is this right or is this wrong? And there's a question. We're studying current culture. What does current culture say about right and wrong? There is no such thing. Because what I think is right, and what you think is right. And we can be totally opposite in our thinking. If I think this is purple, what color is it? It's purple. What do you mean you're saying it's black? You're wrong, because I think that's purple. If I think I'm a dolphin, guess what? Somebody's going to spray us down. Walter will bring hot water and wilt me really quick. Okay? I mean, we laugh, but it's not really funny, is it? Is truth truth? Yes, truth is truth, but in our postmodern society, truth is all relative. There is no such thing as truth anymore. But we make moral assessments. It's very interesting when you go to people who say truth is relative, and you start talking about some particular event that happened. They say, that's just awful. That is terrible what that person did. Really? Why is it terrible? Well, because they think so. But was it terrible? Probably was. Why is it really terrible? Because it was wrong. There's such a thing as right, and there's such a thing as wrong. But if there's truth is relative, there's only what I think is terrible, and what you think is terrible, and we may disagree on that, and we may come to a big fight over it, and so on. And why shouldn't we have a fight, and why can't I come and punch you in the face if there's no right and wrong? Why would it be wrong for me to come punch? Well, it might be wrong for me to come punch somebody in the face, because I might get punched back a lot harder. But I mean, I'm just talking in general. Why would it be wrong for me to walk up and punch you in the face if there's no such thing as right and wrong? Why can't I do that? We say, well, that would be wrong. That would hurt me. No, I think it's right. I'd like to do that. I like punching people in the face, so I should be able to do that. Does our society talk that way these days? So-and-so committed this crime, and they say, well, he really, he didn't quite understand what he was. No, some people don't understand what they're doing. I'm not making fun of them. There are some people that do have diminished capacity and so on, and they do stuff and they don't understand. But most of the cases, Joe knew what he was doing when he shot the guy. But we make moral assessments every day, don't we? Do we devise plans? Anybody ever make any plans? Every morning you plan to get up? And you actually succeeded this morning anyway. We all make plans, don't we? Do they always work? No. But God's plans always work, don't they? Carry out responsibilities. What are some of God's responsibilities that he's given to himself that we're very thankful for? What does he say he'll do? He'll never leave us nor forsake us. So he's made that a responsibility, right? What else? Okay, he provides for us. What else? Answers our prayers. What does it tell us in Romans? There's some famous verses in Romans. Whosoever shall call upon the name of the Lord shall be saved. Does God have a responsibility there? He says, you called upon my name, but I don't think I'm going to save you because I don't want to. No, I'm being silly here, but I mean, no, God said, if you call upon my name, I'm going to save you. He's created a responsibility for himself. We didn't create that. He created that. And what about us? Do we have responsibilities? We all have some kind of responsibilities. Are we supposed to carry them out? Yes, we are. So we're created in the image of God, okay? Is God a blessing to us? If we're created in his image, what are we supposed to be? A blessing to others. Have you been a blessing to others this week? Have you blessed somebody this week? Okay, we're created in God's image, but here's the other side. Adam sinned. Romans 5 says, for as by one man sin entered into the world, and death by sin, so death passed upon how many people? All men, for that all have sinned. Okay, we're very capable of atrocities. Mankind commit atrocities. Gross injustice. How low can we go as human beings? How low can we go? Pretty low. What did God say in Genesis 6:5 when he looked down before the flood? What did he say about mankind? They were wicked. How wicked? How much of the time? Only evil continually. Continually. How long is that? That's all the time. Everything they did was evil. Okay, that's how low we can go, that everything we do is evil. Some modern examples. Was Hitler evil? Hitler was responsible for at least 15 million people being murdered. Was that evil? And a lot of other people that weren't murdered were terribly treated and so on. And if you take the war that was caused by Hitler and so on, there's a lot more people than that. What about Stalin? Well, we don't know how many people he killed. Somewhere, everybody agrees he killed at least 6 million, and the estimates go up as high as 50 million people that Stalin killed. And he didn't just kill people, there was a lot of other stuff happened too. What about Mao Zedong? In excess of 30 million people died under the Great March Forward and so on. Remember this guy? Anybody remember this guy? Pol Pot, Cambodia, killing fields? Well, he was a little bit smaller because it was a smaller country. But he just took everybody out of the cities and put them out in the country, and then they starved to death. It killed over 2 million people. Have we had even more modern examples of that? Can you think of some other examples of atrocities? Just about every day we hear of atrocities that are happening in various countries where people, the churches are burned or people are captured or whatever. We had I don't know, you know the lady that was kidnapped here a while ago in Haiti, right? You know her? Well, there's a missionary down there right now that's kidnapped. This is happening all the time. Do people do bad things? Yeah. That's fairly close to home, and we have other things that happen. Well, I think we're going to leave that here. We've got a lot more stuff to talk about on biblical economics. The bottom line is God made us in his image, and he expects us to act in his image, and he gives us stuff, and he expects us to use it for his glory. And that's why we're here. There's only one reason we're here, for God's glory. We're not here for me. You're not here for you. We're here for him. And we need to remember that. Father, we thank thee for your word. We thank thee for the good time we can have together studying your word. We thank thee for the many principles and direct statements that you make that guide our lives. And we pray that we would live as you would ask us to do. We pray for the morning service you would bless there. In Jesus' name, amen.